you, and thank you everyone for attending the webinar today. I'll dive straight in. We'll just have a few slides just to set the scene of what we're going to talk about, and then we'll be mainly doing demos today. So today we're talking about KWIZ Forms, how you can take your regular, quite bland SharePoint forms, add additional logic, add repeating tables, conditions, interdependent lookups to make it a really useful business form, and actually being able to show you that I can do all of that in the browser without any complex technical skills. A couple of key things to say. Firstly, that the KWIZ Forms app isn't hosted somewhere else. It's within your SharePoint environment. It's enhancing the SharePoint form directly within your environment. So it's quick. Your data is not going off to some other location like some of the other solutions. And anyone who's seen KWIZ Forms before, previously, will know that that was built on the classic SharePoint experience. And what we'll be primarily focusing on today is the new modern forms. So this uses Microsoft's new Fluent design fabric. It's fully responsive, so we'll be able to see it resizing directly on screen. You can use it on mobile devices. The classic interface is still there if you're still using the classic experience, or you can use the modern experience with either modern or classic SharePoint. So you've got a few different options around how you can do it, and we'll show you how you can easily switch between those different experiences during the course of the demo. Now, I like to try and keep things focused on what the product does, so I'm going to be diving straight into a demo. Obviously, I can't give out specific customer examples, but I'm building a lot of what I'm going to try and show you today based on my customer experiences of using KWIZ Forms in a number of different solutions. And we're actually going to show you what it does to start with, and then I'll take you through the journey of how we can build that up in about 20 minutes, half an hour. So giving you a great short experience of how it works. Like Sarah says, feel free to ask questions as we go along. We probably won't get to those until the end of the webinar. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to my browser. And as I said, the first thing I'll show you is the end experience. So I'm in a site here, and I've taken the example of a case management system. Now this could be for any case management type solution, an IT help desk, a business service desk, a company providing services to their customers, their vendors, whatever it might be, any sort of customer service type scenario. I've just taken as an example here. And in these sorts of scenarios, we have a lot of things going on. We need to capture information from the users when they log their case. It might be we only need to capture certain information to start with, and then we need to assign the case to someone, notify them that that case has been assigned to them, maybe capture some documents associated to our case, capture some notes associated to our case, maybe multiple notes, maybe multiple documents, so related items, those sort of things which are quite hard to do in SharePoint. Maybe we need to link it to a customer and a contact, so related lookups. And maybe there's logic that only certain fields should appear to us at different points in the journey of this case. All sorts of common requirements, but actually all sorts of things which is quite tricky to do within SharePoint. And sure, you might be able to use something like Power Apps, but I guarantee you won't be able to build something like this in 30 minutes in a Power Apps solution. So let me show you what's under the hood first of all, and then we'll show you this form working. So I've got a core case list here, and you can see I've got some simple columns like the title, the owner, the date it was logged, the status. I've got a resolution, and I've got a description. I've also got a number of related lists here. I'll show you them in site contents so we can actually see them all and we understand what's been set up here. So firstly, I've got a case notes list. So a list where I'm storing all of the different notes which I'm making against the case. So in this list, I've got a title of the note, I've got a description field, and I've got a date field. So we can see some basic bits of information. So we may well want to store multiple different notes associated with our case. The same with documents. So we want to store some documents associated with your case. I'll go into that later so we can see how that's being structured. I've then also got 3 other related lists here. I've got a list which has got my regions. I've got a list which has got my customers. There's my regions, so just a few different regions. So my top level, looking up a region. I've got some contacts as well. Let's have a quick look at my customers. So I can see I've got a few different customers. Here I'm defining which region that customer is in, and also whether they're active or not, and who their account manager is. So some different bits of data. Maybe I only want to show active customers when I select a customer in my form. And then finally at the bottom level, I've got some contacts, so the people who are associated with my customers. So a few different levels of information. And we can pull that all together really simply using KWIZ Forms. So we'll start off by creating a new case, and we can show you that we don't necessarily display all of the information when the case is created. So we'll click here and click New. And you'll see straight away that whilst this looks like a SharePoint form, it's certainly not behaving like a SharePoint form. It's got a different layout. It's got some tabs going on here. So we've got some tabs here. We've got multiple columns listed in the page. As I said, it's a fully responsive page. Just grab my browser and show you this adjusting. So adjusting and resizing how I want it to. We've got fields laid out across different tabs here. Got some documents listed here. So let's go and set up a new case. So let's say I've got a broken laptop. Notice how some of these fields are locked. So they're displaying to me, but they're locked. I can't change them at this point. That's some of the rules we've put in place with KWIZ Forms. Let's log a date. Let's say it's today. And then here we've got these interdependent lookups. So I can select a region. Let's say I want to select North America. I can filter by a specific account manager. So I only want to see one which Andrew has got. So it's only presenting me with a couple. And it's also even filtering that to only show me active customers of Andrew's. Let me just change that and we can see it differently. So let's change that to Joe. We can see he's got one here. And then I can go ahead and select a contact against that. Note I've even got the options here with these lookups to have adds, so we can add new records as we go through, all configurable. And if we switch across to the next page, we'll just put in a description. We'll come back to the documents. I'm just going to hit save here. And that will have created my new case. Pretty simple, but some nice logic going on. And you'll notice fields like resolution weren't displayed because obviously we haven't resolved the case yet. Let's go in and edit my case, and we'll show you how some of this behavior is then changing. So when we were creating the case, there was only 2 tabs displayed here because it was in a new form state. So one of the things we can do with KWIZ Forms is control when stuff appears and when stuff doesn't appear. So as I move it now, as I'm allowed to change the status to an assigned state, notice how that tab appears instantly. I don't need to save. I'm changing the behavior of the form dynamically. It's also asking me at this point for a case owner. So let's assign it to Peter. And I'm going to hit save. Now, one of the other features of QuizCon Forms is that we can build out workflow activities as well. So I've built out one of these, and they're called actions. And it allows us to do various things such as send email notifications, create items, call out to web services as well. So in this case, I've just got a really simple email, which just sends me a notification telling me that the case has been assigned to me and dynamically picking up the customer name in this case. So I'll close my email and I'll just return to my case. And let's edit again and let's just see a bit more of this functionality in action. So we'll look at how we can have related items as well, or what's called repeating rows in QuizCon Forms. So think of examples like case notes, or you're filling in an expenses claim and you need to have rows of expenses. A mileage claim, rows of mileage. Easy to do. I've got this section on the page here. So I can come in and add documents. If I'm connecting to a document library, I upload the document. Go and select it. Look at the range of locations. I can select from SharePoint locations. I can upload a file, web links. I'll just find a file here. Let's use this report here, which I've got. I'll add my file. And I can even work with metadata here. So I've got a range of metadata fields against that library, and it's presenting them here. So we'll say we'll add a report. And then over here in this tab, I've got another type of repeating row. So in this case, connecting to a list, and I've got different fields of information. So I can come in here and I can specify a date. I can put some, let's do some investigation. And I can even go and add additional notes. So I can build up multiple rows here. So I can say, let's pick another date. Now we don't have to hit save. We can also hit apply, which will save the form in context, keeping it open. Note what I did there. I picked a date in the future, so we can have validation either in the form or the individual rows. So I can't pick a date in the future. That's part of my rules I put in place. So I'll take that back to today. And then I hit apply. And this then says that these have been created. Maybe it's time now to resolve my case. So I come in here and I'll click resolve. I'm happy with that. But I've got another validation here erroring, showing me that there's some incorrect values. So if we go to case validation, you can see here that it's asking me for a resolution. So in this case, we'll say a fix was required, and then we can hit save. And that's what it's all about. It's about building up some functionality of different rules, cascading lookups, repeating rows, logic, layout to build out a form experience. In this case, in the new modern experience. So let me talk you through how I built that out. So I'm going to switch over to another site. Well, I've got all the same basic components set up, but I've not configured anything in QuizCon Forms. So I've got all those lists which I showed you previously, but none of the logic's been applied. So let me take you through that in about 6 or 7 steps, showing you each of the different areas. So firstly, I've got my SharePoint list here. At this point, QuizCon Forms app is installed to my site, but I haven't configured it at all. So I'm using a regular SharePoint form at this point. If I switch to QuizCon Forms, This is going to open an experience for me directly in the browser where I can start to configure everything. And I'm going to start with the layout of my form. So we can do that under Form Layout. Now at the moment this is quite a sort of a little bit of a techie interface. I still think it's quite end user friendly, but the guys at QuizCom are keen to move this to an even easier sort of wizard style drag and drop environment, which we'll see in the next few months. But I'm quite happy with the way it works at the moment. Now to do this, we build out groups. So each section of our form tab we can build out as a group. Now we can present those groups either as tabs or in an accordion interface. And there's a number of other formatting options here around how the captions are set, whether we want to apply aliases to our fields. So I'm going to have 3 tabs or groups here. So I'm going to create one for case information. Now I can define the default number of columns per row. So in this case, I'm going to say I want 2 columns by default. And then I'm going to put a few of my fields in. So I'm going to want the title of my case. I want the status. And then I'm just building out my layout. So I'm going here and saying I'd like the date. I'd like the case owner. And then I'll just add another group. So say I want one for my case details where I put the description and my documents later on. I can do that. And then finally, I'll have one for case resolution. Well, I'll put that resolution. Yeah. Look at all the different options we've got here. So we can come in here, define some alignment options for each field. We can define how many columns they span. And as I mentioned earlier, we can even come in and put aliases. So maybe you've got quite system or technical field names. Maybe you're creating your field names in SharePoint without spaces, but you want to display them as spaces on the form. You can do that sort of thing here with aliases. So that gives us our setup and layout of our form. Let's save that and we'll just have a quick look at how that's changed our form immediately. Obviously, we've already seen that in my previous example, but just to show you the journey we're going through. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click New. Load up my form. Oh, hang on a minute. That's loading it more in the classic interface, and that's because I forgot to switch to the modern QuizCom Forms experience. So this is a nice opportunity for us to see it in how it looks in the classic experience, but it's really quick and easy for me to switch to the modern experience. So just returning to my list and returning to QuizCom Forms, you see at the bottom here I've got the option to try modern forms. So let's do that. It gives me a little message, and I'll switch to the modern forms. I can switch back at any point. Let's go back to my cases list. And when we click New Now, we'll now see that same form layout, but we'll be using that new modern Microsoft Fluent design fabric to present that form. Yeah, and here we see our form. Looks brilliant already, doesn't it? We've got these different tabs. Still looks a little bit, you know, not great. Well, the nice thing is we've got some different style options here. So let's look at what we get available to us. Now, you know, if you employ a web designer, someone who's familiar with CSS, you can do some work around the design and layout here. And I've worked with some web designers and we've done some fantastic things with how customers present their forms. But also at a simple layer, QuizCom Forms inherits the design, the theme applied to the site. But QuizCom have given you some great little simple styles to help you enhance what gets displayed here. So I really like this one, which adds the styles to the tabs. It gives it something, it makes it more look like a form. But there are some other ones here, including things like title field styles, maxed widths. So you might find that in some browser experiences, the fields get too large. It looks okay on my laptop today, but maybe on one of my big screens, the fields stretch right across the screen. So there's some styles to compact the form if you want to. And now we've got these great tabs. I can easily move around my form and we can see them spread out across these different tabs. So form layout, nice and simple. Now let's apply those lookups. So being able to select region, customer, and contact. So we do that by going back into KWIZ Forms. And we do that under Cascading Lookup. Now there are some different versions of KWIZ Forms, so Cascading Lookup is part of the Professional Edition. And what we're doing here is, you're familiar with a lookup field within SharePoint. It works okay, but there's certain limitations to it. You can't, for instance, look at a different site. You can't make that field dependent on another field or dependent on another lookup. And that's the sort of thing the cascading lookup does. So I'm going to create a new column. First of all, I'm just going to create one for region. Now, this is actually a really basic lookup, and I could probably use a regular SharePoint lookup. But even still, I like to use KWIZ for this because there's some extra functionality. So I've got some basic filtering options here. And I can even do things like define whether I want to have an add new item text to allow people to add new items. I don't in this case, so I'm just going to go and create my simple region lookup. Next, I'm going to create one for customer. So I'm going to go and select the customer list. Now this time I want to do a few more things. In my customer list, I was defining whether a customer was active or not, and I'd created a view for that. So I can say here, I only want to show customers in the active view, so restricting items in my lookup. Again, something I couldn't do with a regular SharePoint lookup. I can also filter my results in two ways. So I can filter it with a field from that list itself, from that customer list. So in this case, the account manager. So giving people the ability to dynamically filter on the form. Also, I can filter based on a column within my cases list. So in this case, I only want to display customers based on the region. And in this case, I pick the column to match it to the region list. So I've got quite a lot of functionality going on in my customer column. It's only showing me active customers. It's only showing me active customers based on the region selected, giving me the option to then further filter that based on account manager. Okay, I'm not going to let people add new customers. So that's my customer field. And then finally, I'm going to add my contact field. So I select contacts. And then I select to filter it based on the customer field and the customer field from my contact list. I'm going to let people add a new contact, but I'm going to change the text to say add new contact. So again, just a sort of range of customization options available to me. Let's save these settings. I'm going to create another one. I've already saved that. And then let's go back to form layout. And before we can use these fields, we need to add them to our form. So I'm going to add them to my main case information tab. Now I want to create a little divider, some presentational elements to my form. So I can do that. I've got a couple of HTML elements for a text cell or horizontal line. So I'm going to select that here. Notice how easy it is to just push that across 2 columns. And I'll do the same with region. Push that across 2 columns. And now I can go and select my customer and contact field. So KWIZ Forms has created those additional cascading lookup fields in my list already. Let's save these settings. And just return to my cases list. And we'll just go in and create a new item. And here we can see, so we can go in and select a region. Let's select North America. It's limited the options in my customer field. And we can filter that further as we previously saw by selecting an account manager, which will then in turn limit my contacts. That took me less than 5 minutes to create. Trying to code that could take days. Trying to build that in Power Apps would probably take an equal amount of time. So, creating my cascading lookups. Now let's have a look at repeating rows. So putting those sub-tables within my form, in this case my documents and my case notes, but it could be expenses lines, mileage details, order details, whatever you want it to be, that classic parent and child relationship. So I've clicked to load the repeating rows, which is another feature of the professional version of KWIZ Forms. And I'm creating a column in my cases list to have these repeating rows in, although the data goes into my child lists. So let's start off with case notes, we'll call them. We have a few options appear. How many rows do we want to display by default when that control appears? So we could have 3 rows by default if we wanted to. And then we select our target list. So I'm going to select the cases list. And in here, I can then, I don't want to select the cases list, I want to select the cases notes list. And I want to then select my columns, so the date field, the title field, and the notes field. So select, I don't have to select them all, but I could select which columns and the order I want. Even do some additional layout options. If I had numeric fields, I could have totals in here as well. I'm going to hit save and add that column. And then we'll go and add one for our documents as well. So my case notes one is now there. So then we'll create one for documents. In this case, I'll just default to having 1 row. Look how I can have the default add row text. So add docs, let's say. And I can select my documents list. Now this area is really great. I've worked with the KWIZ development team around this specific piece of functionality. So one of the options you have is actually, as the documents are filed, you can file them in subfolders, which is a great way to organize files. Maybe you're organizing them by case, customer, or whatever else it might be. And then you can do all sorts of things like maybe secure those documents in different ways. So I want to file my documents, and I'm going to file them by case and then the ID of my case. Finally, again, I select what fields I want. So I want the name of the document, its category. I'd like to see the file name in my repeating rows column. Yeah? Okay, so we've created those couple of repeating tables, and that creates a column in my cases list which I can then define in the form layout and add those columns to the form. Let's do that quickly. So let's say we want to add that in case information. I'm going to add my documents. And in case resolution, I'm going to add my case notes. Let's hit save, and then let's see those pieces in action. So having a look at case details, I've got that ability to now add a document, select a category, and under case resolution, I've got my case notes. And remember how I defined it to have 3 rows by default. So different setups, different layouts, dependent on what I'm trying to do. So I've got all my data capture fields. Now let's add a little bit of logic. We don't necessarily want all of this showing when I create a new case. So let's show you how I can implement some rules and conditions and constraints. So first of all, I'm going to add some logic to show, hide, and disable fields based on certain rules. So I can select a column here. So let's say I don't want people changing the status when they create a new case. It should always go in as a status of logged. Simple. Let's select the status column, add a new rule. Now I can choose which form I'm applying it to. So in this case, the new form. That's the only one I want to do. And I'm choosing the behavior. Do I want to show it? Do I want to hide it? Do I want to disable it? I want to disable it. That's simple. Next, I'm going to disable the owner field when it's in a logged state. So I'm going to select the case owner field, and then I'm going to say, well, that could apply to the new and the edit form. And I'm going to disable it. And in this time, I'm putting a condition in. So I'm saying when the status is, note here we can do both current and previous, is equal to, but we've got a lot of other contain operators here. When the status is equal to logged. Yeah. And then finally, one more. I'm going to hide the resolution field until the case status equals resolved. So again, we'll do that to the new and the edit form, and we'll hide it. Other options here. Look how you can do that based on the current user. So you could hide fields based on attributes around the current user, including in. So if they're a member of a certain SharePoint group, so you could say hide a field from any users who are part of a certain SharePoint group, or the other way around, only show it to a user who is a member of a certain group. Lots of functionality here. In this case, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. So I'm just going to say when the status is not equal to resolved. So it will be hidden unless the status is resolved. So simple logic added to my form to hide and show fields. We can do the same with our groups tabs in our form layout. So we can go and select a specific group and hide it under certain conditions. So let's take the case resolution section, and let's say we want to, again, look at the options, current user. But I'm going to base it on a field, and I'm going to say show it when the current value is not equal to logged. So I'm only going to show it where when any other status, but when it's logged, I don't want that section appearing. And finally, I just want to apply a little validation rule. And there's lots of different validation rules we can do here, but I'm just going to do a really simple one, which is a constraint around the resolution. So I'm going to say the resolution, I'm going to add a rule for it. And I can look up those, but I'm going to just say, I'm going to add a condition, and I'm going to say, well, if it's not empty, then I'm going to say you need to put in a resolution. So basically putting a message out there if you try and save the resolution without a value populated. And that's actually not quite right, because I haven't included my status in there. So I only want this rule to run when the status is equal to resolved. So when the status is resolved and that field is empty, it will show that validation error on save. So all these validation rules I built out in the space of less than 5 minutes. And this has then added that extra capability to my form. Oh, I forgot to set a default value for my logged field. If that had done, then that field would be, that tab would be hidden. But notice how that's disabled, and I can't use it. Let's just quickly change that so we can actually see that in action. So let me just set a default value for my status field. That's better, isn't it? So now our tab is hidden. We can't change our status. We can't set the value for our owner. And we've also got those other logics coming along as we move through the form, which I showed you in the original demo. Now, in the last couple of minutes, I just want to talk to you about actions and activities, which is the workflow component, the sort of triggering other things happening based on things in our processes. But these are much simpler and quicker to build out than SharePoint Designer, Power Automate, or other workflow designer tools. Firstly, we build out reusable activities. So things we want to use one or more of in an action. So I'm going to create a new activity. Look at the range we've got here to add items, copy items, send an email, even call out to web services or launch a workflow. So I'm just going to go and call mine send case email. I'm going to give it a quick description. And then I'm going to define the properties of this case. Now, we want to try and make this as dynamic as possible. So we want to use our variables from our form here. So we can say the recipient will be the case owner, the subject will be case, and then the title of the case, and then the description text of the email will be using properties as well. So maybe referencing the customer. So configuring an action to happen. Now I could configure multiple of these. I could send an email and add a task to a task list, for example. But for the sake of speed today, we'll just have one. And then we create and build these activities into our solution using custom actions. And we can do two types of actions. We can either have one which runs automatically when an item is added or updated, or we can add them as ribbon buttons, so buttons sitting on the control, the navigation just above the form. So you might want to have a manual button which lets you assign the case. And it's really simple. So we then add one or more of our activities we've defined, and then we add conditions which those activities occur under. So in this case, I'm going to say when the status is equal to assigned and the owner is not empty. Yeah. So adding that simple rule to have that email sent out. And again, I built that out really simply in a couple of minutes, much quicker than I would need to. I wouldn't even probably been able to get my workflow tool started in the time I built this out. And that's really what KWIZ Forms is all about. In the space of about half an hour today, I've taken you from having several plain SharePoint lists, and I built out an experience in the modern SharePoint, different layouts, interconnected lookup fields, repeating rows, tables within my form, and then I've also added constraints and rules to my form. And finally, I showed you how we can introduce simple workflow logic to send emails, add items to other lists, or even get out to more complex scenarios as well. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Sarah. Hopefully we've had a few questions during the course of the demo, and we'll hopefully answer those to you, and any which we can't, we'll send on to the product team to come back to you over email about.